knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, all the standard moves. This time, white had delayed playing the move pawn to c3 a little bit. So let us now talk about some of the basics of why c3 is even played and why white cannot, for example, play more ambitiously. So back in the day when the Italian game was just being explored in the 17th century, the players used to be a lot more ambitious. They would go c3 right away, looking to play pawn to d4 and grab all the space. Now, if that was possible and it could just come unpunished, then white would be nearly winning. For example, if you imagine such moves and white just gets to keep his center, this is absolutely amazing. You don't need to know anything beyond that. You're just winning. However, the problem is that black's able to go check, and he's attacking, I mean, of course, it's a check, and now the pawn on e4 is gonna fall. So this is a very important tactical detail that does not allow white to play for d4 right away. And that's why he would often play pawn to d3 and then castle and then prepare pawn to d4 only a little bit later, maybe 8 or 10 moves later. Now, crucially, the move c3 does not have to be connected to the idea of playing pawn to d4. Instead, it could just be used for a couple other reasons. For example, it restricts the black knight from coming to b4 or d4, and it restricts some other black pieces like a bishop from accessing the squares. And also, of course, white prepares playing pawn to b4, the point being to grab space on the queen side, as we had discussed in the previous video. Now, in this game, white decided to delay playing pawn to c3. He instead had castled first. This does not really result in any kind of problems. There is no downside to not playing c3 quicker, and here he played pawn to c3. And in this position, Peter Svidler decided to go down a slightly different route than I went in the previous game, which is going pawn to a5. The idea being to, instead of making room for the bishop and, thinking that white will just expand and he'll deal with that later, playing a5 to prevent b4 physically. Now, crucially, white cannot really achieve b4 by playing a3, because if black just castles or does something and white plays b4, here the rook on a1 is unprotected, so black can take. Now, the problem is white can never take back with the a pawn because the rook is gonna hang. And if white were to take with his c-pawn, now we need to learn of a very important pattern that you'll encounter in many other openings, not just the Italian game, and that is that black can just take this pawn, because if white takes back, he is going to lose his rook. So black just wins a pawn for free, definitely not something white's interested in. Now, white decided to just go rook to e1 for that reason. This move simply develops the rook, overprotects the pawn on e4, potentially prepares d4 without white ever risking hanging this pawn, and also makes room for another maneuver we had just found out about in the previous video, which is bringing this knight to d2 and then to f1, potentially looking to bring it further to the king side, or maybe even go to e3. Now, here, black prevented the move bishop to g5 with h6, and white just kept developing. So far, so good, everything is normal. Now, white could consider multiple things regarding his bishop, right? Because, well, he needs to make some decision. So he could take on e6. But the downside of that is that after f takes e, black ends up opening the f file for his rook. And also, the pawn on e6 is actually not weak at all. It's really useful when it comes to controlling the squares on d5 and f5. So white did not want to do that. Neither did white want to, for example, go back, because potentially black would exchange the bishops at any moment when he would like, and as a result, well, the position would simplify. White just didn't feel like, simplifying it yet. And also black would try to play for d5. Now, white decided to play bishop to b5. This move is connected to a couple ideas. Potentially, the bishop could even escape later in such a weird way as a4, c2, but also, of course, white is saying, hey, I might actually take on c6, double your pawns, and then strike with d4, which would be even easier for me to do, because the knight would not be controlling that square. Now, it is also worth mentioning that the move bishop to b5 creates more than just a positional threat, but also, in fact, the bishop on e6 and the knight on c6 can become really tactically vulnerable. And if black were to just skip a tempo or, make any kind of a normal looking move like rook to e8, the problem is white might be able to go pawn to d4, and here after taking, and the black bishop moving somewhere, the move pawn to d5 will end up winning a piece. Now, admittedly, black got himself in even more trouble with rook e8 because now there's also a pin. However, definitely this d4, d5 is a very, very effective threat, very, big deal that black has to be looking out for. Now, this idea also is something you can see in a lot of, say, English positions, but let's not get into that. This is definitely a pattern you might want to be aware of. A bishop on e6 and a knight on c6 runs into the fork d5. Now, going back, so black removed the knight, in no small part also to address this threat. White continued pawn to d4, and after bishop to a7, white captured. Now, the idea, of course, well, white's looking to win a pawn, harass this knight, and black's not really losing a pawn because he's able to play knight to g4, counter-attacking the pawn on f2. There's a threat of a fork where the rook is going to be vulnerable and he wants to take back. However, after the move bishop to e3, knight to e5, white was able to come up with a very strong positional idea. He captured on a7, removed the knight, made sure to not trade the pieces, and in a few moves, after a few more natural moves were played, white improved his knight, black tried to trade the bishop. Here I would like to ask you not just what to do on this very move, but also what kind of ideas could you come up with as white? And what would be your plan over the next couple of moves? Okay, I hope you gave it some thought. So the pawn on e4 tends to be a lot more valuable than the pawn on d6 because it gives white a lot more space. So for example, the pawn on e4 controls squares on f5 and d5. And black is generally not extremely well coordinated. For example, the rook on a7 is really misplaced. And I think that trading pieces will be beneficial for black here for more than one reason. One, it will solve his space problems, and two, it will just take any potential, energy out of the position and enable black to consolidate without having to worry about any restrictions or any threats coming up soon. So white, of course, did not want to trade the bishop, and he retreated. And after black played the move a4, looking to grab a little bit of space himself on the queen side, white came up with a very strong positional plan, g3. The first big point of this is that the knight on g6 needs to be restricted. Generally speaking, and I don't really want to deviate from the topic too much, the knights in chess tend to be worst placed if it comes to the third rank, for example, on g6, b6, b3, and g3. This, in my experience, are the worst squares for the knights to be, because just one pawn with a move like g3 can restrict the knight and prevent it from doing literally anything. So very often the knights end up really inactive there. And then besides just restricting the knight, white's idea here was to play pawn to f4 and kick this knight back and grab even more space. Now, black continued at knight c6, and here comes my next question too. What would you do here as white? I would like more than one move if possible. Okay, I hope you gave it some thought. So again, white has more space, and trading pieces is not beneficial for us at all. Generally speaking, you need to differentiate very clearly between two concepts, having more space and having space advantage. Now, more space is just an observation, but space advantage is when your opponent is inconvenienced by the fact he has less space. And as pieces come off, the space advantage we have will be decreasing. So what white did here, white moved the knight away, not just somewhere randomly, but to b5, winning a tempo, and then continued with a very powerful positional move. That was the whole point, pawn to c4. Now, the knight's coming back to c3, and these gorgeous pawns on c4, e4, and f4 are restricting black completely. He literally has no room, and cannot do absolutely anything. Now, black tried to maneuver a little bit, tried to potentially capture the knight on b5. Of course, white doesn't want to allow for that. He first attacked the rook, and then here I would have personally preferred the move knight to c3, keeping as many pieces on the board and as much tension as possible. But white continued rook to d1. He is not really afraid of this capture because after c takes b5, now the black knights are not able to access c6. Neither can that knight go to a6. And white will potentially have ideas like pawn to b6, getting rid of this pawn and then winning this one, ruining the black structure. He will likely collect all the pawns very soon. For example, if black just plays a random move, b6 could be really strong. And now if black were to, for example, take, and we capture on d6, as a result, as you can see, all these pawns tend to be very, very vulnerable. White's gonna be able to harass them with knight c4. He will be able to go pawn to e5 and improve his bishop by positioning it here. This looks terrible for black. Now, at the same time, another idea really worth pointing out that I want you to keep in mind is e5. The idea being put more pressure on the pawn on d6 and benefit from the fact there is a pin black cannot really take. Now, black decided here to play rook to e8. I think white had some more direct ideas like pawn to c5, but he decided to just keep the tension and played bishop to g2. and after black played bishop c6, finally this break happened. One more time, black is suffering because the queen is undefended, and all the pieces here are absolutely inactive. The knight on d8, the rook on 8 are not participating in the game at all, and as you can see, they cannot help prevent the central disaster from happening. Now black played knight c8, trying his, last desperate efforts to prevent the center from collapsing, but white just captured, and after a couple of trades, white could potentially just consider taking this pawn right away, nothing wrong with that, but he wanted to capture it instead with the knight, and in a couple of moves he succeeded. He ended up playing rook to d1, and then protecting the pawn on b2, and finally picking this pawn. Now, white has a lot more space. The black pieces here, I would still not ever dare to call them coordinated or, comfortably placed. There are still some tactical problems, like at some point you could imagine this rook somehow getting trapped by accident. And later on, Dmitry Yakovenko ended up converting his advantage flawlessly. By the way, Yakovenko is one of the players who are maybe not as known, but he is an